Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Frerin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. It should have been impossible, but there it was, right in front of them. At great expense on both ends, a collection of samples from Earth had been teleported across the galaxy. Now, the Council had gathered to discuss the findings. Lead scientist Hackzur, well aware that the analysis on his datapad would be disruptive, chose to soften the blow by starting with the less shocking results.
Respected ones, the results of my team's research are ready, and I have come before this chamber today to present our conclusion.
Hackzur began, his large blue eyes scanning the floating islands around him, where each ambassador and their teams waited within their preferred atmospheres.
The first finding is that Earth's atmosphere is composed of 20% oxygen and 78% nitrogen.
The 15 floating islands ceased their gentle drift through the chamber's vast space, coming to an unnatural halt as if the very air had solidified around them. Each island was a perfect sphere of environmental control, some filled with methane mists, others with dense chlorine clouds, and one, the Underi delegations, contained a perfect globe of water where the aquatic beings swam in circles, their movements gentle and elegant. On the island designated for the Korthax delegation, a fight had broken out between two junior members, their 6 arms tangling as they grappled with the implications of what they'd just heard. The Zenti representatives pressed the tips of their antennae together, exchanging rapid bursts of electrical communication that made the air around their island crackle with static discharge. Hackzur stood on the raised central platform, waiting for the barrage of questions about Earth he knew was about to come. Despite having no military background whatsoever, he maintained perfect military posture, both arms clasped behind his back while his datapad rested untouched on the lectern before him. The natural crown of bones that adorned his head, a characteristic feature of the Xeraxi species that grew more complex and intricate with age, had developed 20 distinct branches over his 2 centuries of life, each one carved with the microscopic patterns that recorded his academic achievements. They were the equivalent of tattoos for his species. His flowing white robes, the traditional garment of a Xeraxi scholar, felt suffocating under the weight of so many gazes. The fabric, woven from the silk of moon moths native to his homeworld, was designed to regulate temperature and moisture, but no amount of sophisticated textile engineering could ease the pressure of delivering news that would overturn millennia of established scientific doctrine. The Underi were the first to gather their minds from the shock. Their floating island, a perfect sphere of crystal-clear water held in place by gravitational manipulators, began to move forward through the chamber's carefully controlled atmosphere. The dozen Underi within swam to the edge closest to Hackzur's platform, their blue bodies pressing against the invisible barrier that kept their water from spilling into the chamber. They wore no clothes. Such things were antithetical to their philosophy of freedom in body and spirit, and their webbed hands gestured frantically as they communicated among themselves. Ambassador Flowing Current was the first to speak, her voice transmitted through the translation computers that converted the Underi's underwater vocalizations into sounds the other species could comprehend.
Scientist Hackzur, surely there has been an error in your little measurements. 20% oxygen? It would turn their very oceans into a toxic soup. No aquatic life could survive under such conditions. In case you don't know, oxygen can be toxic.
Respected Ambassador,
Hackzur interrupted gently, his 4-fingered hand moving to activate a holographic display above the lectern.
I assure you, our measurements have been verified by an array of independent teams using different methodologies. The oxygen content is accurate.
The display showed molecular diagrams and chemical formulas that made several islands drift closer, floating as their occupants strained to see despite the perfect clarity of the projections. The Vorthen delegation's island, filled with a dense purple gas, spun slowly as its inhabitants tried to view the data from multiple angles.
But how do they survive?
Another Underi pressed forward, his gill slats flapping in distress.
The internal oxidation reactions would destroy their cells from within. It would be like swimming in acid.
Haxir sighed inwardly, though his outward demeanor remained composed in the face of the less than informed question.
The creatures of Earth have adapted to what we would consider extreme violence at the cellular level. Their bodies produce specialized enzymes, catalase, superoxide, dismutase, and dozens of others that neutralize the reactive oxygen molecules before they can cause excessive damage. Furthermore, they have evolved redundant DNA repair mechanisms that operate continuously. Continuously?
The voice came from the Thorali island, where the bipedal silicon-based lifeforms clustered at their viewing window. They were the smallest beings in the vast council chamber.
You mean their very existence is a non-stop war against themselves? Every moment of every day, from birth to death,
Haxir confirmed.
Earth organisms exist in a state of perpetual biochemical warfare with their own metabolism. They age, in part, because this battle slowly accumulates damage faster than their repair systems can compensate.
The Underi ambassador's tail fins became rigid, a sign of deep thought.
And the surfaces? With such oxygen levels, the whole planet should be a tinderbox waiting for a spark. How do they prevent their world from becoming a global bonfire? Surely they must all live underwater?
Several other islands moved closer at this question. The Pyrathi delegation, whose own world had suffered a catastrophic atmospheric ignition event in their distant past, seemed particularly interested in the answer. Haxir's fingers reached for his datapad, bringing up new images. Photographs taken by human probes and satellites showing vast forests, grasslands, and cities. Gasps and untranslatable sounds of disbelief echoed through the chamber.
Earth's surface is predominantly dry land and open ocean, he explained. While fires do occur, frequently in fact, the humans have developed sophisticated methods of prevention and control. Their plant life has evolved with fire as a natural part of many ecosystems. Some species even require fire to reproduce.
Require fire?
The Korthax, who had been fighting earlier, had separated, both now staring at the display with their eyes fully dilated.
This is madness!
I wouldn't call it madness, Haxir said, but it is uncommon. Humans build their settlements with fire-resistant materials, maintain clear zones around structures, and have developed extensive networks of professionals trained specifically in fire suppression. They have chemicals that can smother flames, vehicles that spray water.
They spray water on fire?
Flowing Current's voice rose to a pitch that made the translation device struggle.
But heated water turns into vapor! Would that not burn them?
Water is actually one of their primary fire suppressants,
Haxir replied patiently, pretending not to be bothered by the triviality of the question.
The chemical bond between hydrogen and oxygen in water is quite stable. It absorbs heat and prevents the oxygen in the air from reaching the fuel source, even if some of it turns into vapor.
The Underi delegation swam in agitated patterns, their discussion among themselves creating a churning current within their floating sphere. Other islands had begun to move, jockeying for better positions to question the Zeraxi scientist.
Tell us about air biology,
another Underi demanded.
How does blood function in such an environment? Ours would oxidize instantly if exposed to such concentrations.
Haxir activated another section of his presentation, showing microscopic images of various blood cells.
Earth creatures have evolved numerous blood chemistries. The samples we received contained specimens with yellow blood, blue blood, and red blood, with red being by far the most common among complex organisms.
Red blood? The question came from 3 islands simultaneously.
Iron-based oxygen transport,
Haxir explained.
The humans and many other Earth species use hemoglobin, a protein that binds oxygen using iron atoms. The oxidized iron gives their blood its characteristic red color.
The Ferovan ambassador, whose own species had iron-based biology, but in a completely different configuration, floated to the edge of their floating island's barrier.
Iron exposed to 20% oxygen? The oxidation rate must be insane! The oxidation is controlled by elaborate protein structures that protect the iron while allowing reversible oxygen binding,
Haxir finished.
It's actually quite elegant from a biochemical perspective.
Elegant?
Flowing Current's voice carried a note of hysteria, a contrast to her composed figure inside the floating water bubble.
You call this elegant? What about their atmosphere's other properties? The pressure? The temperature variations?
Haxir's crown bones shifted slightly, a sign of reluctance among his people.
Earth's atmospheric pressure at sea level is approximately 101.3 kilopascals. The temperature ranges from minus 89 degrees Celsius at the coldest recorded surface location to plus 56 degrees at the hottest.
The translator converted the measurement units.
That's a range of 145!
The exclamation came from the Cryoth Island, where the ice-based beings floated in their supercooled nitrogen atmosphere.
How does any biochemistry remain stable across such extremes?
Most Earth organisms don't experience the full range,
Haxir clarified.
They inhabit specific zones where the temperature remains within their tolerance. Humans, however, have developed technology that allows them to survive temporarily in all of these environments.
And gravity?
The Underi ambassador had swum to the very edge of her sphere, her face pressed against the barrier where the full extent of her bare body was visible.
What is the surface gravity?
About 2 times our standard,
said Haxir, looking to the side and trying not to stare at her. The silence that followed was profound. The Underi in their water sphere had gone completely still, floating like dead things in their artificial sea.
That's...
Flowing Current's voice was low.
That's too much. How do they move on land? How do they not collapse under their own weight?
Dense bones, powerful muscles, and cardiovascular systems capable of maintaining blood pressure against the gravitational gradient,
Haxir recited.
I should note that this gravity, combined with the oxygen-rich atmosphere, creates an environment that would be immediately lethal to most known sapient species. The pressure would crush some of us, the gravity would collapse others, and the oxygen would poison the rest.
Then how are we supposed to maintain friendly relations with Earth?
The question came from the distant Compatibility Island, where representatives from various species worked together in a carefully maintained neutral atmosphere.
If their world is deadly to all of us.
Haxir's posture relaxed slightly. This was a question he'd anticipated.
The same way we maintain relations between the Peyrathi and the Cryoth, despite their worlds being mutually annihilating. The same way the Underi trade with the Deserti, though neither can survive on the other's world. Direct physical contact on planetary surfaces is the exception in galactic relations, not the rule. We have stations, neutral meeting grounds, digital communications.
But never has a world been deadly to everyone else.
Flowing Current interrupted.
This Earth, It's not just inhospitable to some of us, it's poisonous to all of us.
That remains to be seen, a new voice interjected. The Vaskrak Island was moving forward, displacing the Undairy sphere with the casual authority of a species that had never learned to ask permission. Where the Undairy moved like dancers in their water, the Vaskrak stood rigid and still as their island approached, their brown-scaled uniforms arranged in perfect military formation. Commander Thraknor stood at the front of the Vaskrak delegation, his scales, limited to his face and chest as was typical for his species, gleaming dully in the chamber's neutral warm light. His light armor, more ceremonial than functional in this peaceful setting, bore the campaign marks of quite a few conquered worlds. When he spoke, it was with the voice of a warrior who viewed words as just another weapon. "Scientist Haxur," Thraknor began, his four eyes focusing on the Zeraxi with predatory intensity. "You speak of atmospheric chemistry and gravity as if they were the only threats. What of Earth's military capabilities? What of their weapons? If they evolved in such a hostile environment, they must be formidable fighters." Haxur's crown bones clicked nervously. "Commander, with all due respect, my team analyzes biospheres, not battlespheres. Do not dissemble." Thraknor cut him off. "Everything you've told us speaks of a world forged in conflict. High oxygen means high energy. Strong gravity means strong bodies. Temperature extremes mean adaptability. These humans, they are warriors by nature, yes?" The other islands had pulled back slightly, giving the Vaskrak room. Even in the supposedly neutral ground of the council chambers, old instincts died hard, and every species knew the Vaskrak's reputation. "I cannot speak to their military nature," Haxur said carefully, "but I can tell you that Earth's surface would be challenging for any invasion force." Thraknor's mouth curled in what his species considered a smile. "Explain." Haxur manipulated his datapad, bringing up a new set of images. "Beyond the atmospheric and gravitational challenges, Earth hosts approximately 1 million described species of insects alone, with estimates suggesting millions more undiscovered. Many of these are capable of delivering venoms, spreading diseases, or simply overwhelming victims through sheer numbers."
Insects? One of the younger Vaskrak scoffed. You think the Vaskrak Legion fears tiny bugs?
Tiny, yes. Harmless? Far from it.
Haxur displayed an image of an army ant swarm.
These organisms operate in colonies numbering in the millions. They can strip a creature the size of a Korthath to the bone in under an hour. And they are just one of thousands of such swarming species. Your armor might protect you for a time, but it has seams. They will find them.
Thraknor's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of interest among his people.
Continue. Then there's the climate.
New images appeared. Hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, sandstorms.
Earth's weather systems are driven by that intense solar energy I mentioned. Storms can generate winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour, precipitation that can flood entire regions in hours, electrical discharges that—
We have weather shielding,
another Vaskrak interrupted.
Designed for your world's weather,
Haxur countered.
Earth's atmosphere is denser, more energetic. Your shields would need significant modification, and even then,
he brought up thermal imaging of a lightning strike.
The chance of fighting the natives would not be trivial.
The Vaskrak delegation had grown quiet, their scales now showing the muted browns of contemplation rather than the vibrant patterns of aggression.
Tell me about the microbes,
Thraknor ordered.
In any invasion, disease is often the greatest enemy.
Haxur's fingers hesitated over his datapad. This was the part he'd been dreading.
Commander, Earth's microbial life is, unusually aggressive. We've identified bacteria that can survive in conditions ranging from Arctic ice to boiling hot springs. Viruses that mutate so rapidly, our standard medical countermeasures would struggle to keep pace. And then there are the protozoans and fungi.
Elaborate on those last two.
They represent a form of aggressive life we've rarely encountered elsewhere. Earth fungi can infect living tissue, growing inside organisms while they're still alive. Some species can alter the behavior of their hosts, effectively taking control of their nervous systems. The protozoans include species that can evade immune responses, hide inside cells, even cross the blood-brain barrier.
Surely those could be neutralized,
One of the Vaskrek medical officers spoke up.
our decontamination procedures.
Are designed for familiar threats.
Haxer interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness.
Earth's microbiomes have evolved in that high-oxygen, high-energy environment we discussed. They're fast, adaptable, and incredibly diverse. We've cataloged diseases that can kill humans who evolved alongside these organisms in days or even hours. For species without any evolutionary exposure to Earth's pathogens.
He didn't need to finish. The implication was clear. The Zenti delegation's antennae were practically sparking with rapid communication. The Undari had retreated to the center of their sphere, as far from the theoretical Earth microbes as they could get. Even the Vastkrak looked troubled.
You're saying Earth is a world of death?
Thraknor stated flatly.
I'm saying,
Haxer chose his words carefully,
that Earth represents a unique evolutionary path. Life there has adapted to conditions that would be instantly lethal to most galactic species. Any direct interaction with Earth's biosphere would require unprecedented precautions.
What about their space capabilities? The question came from the back of the Vastkrak formation. If they can survive all that, they must be formidable in vacuum combat.
Unknown,
Haxer admitted.
The samples we received were biological and atmospheric only. We have no data on their current technological.
An alarm chimed softly, and Haxer glanced at his datapad. His crown bones suddenly went rigid, a Zeraxi expression of shock so profound that several other species recognized it, despite the xenological differences.
What is it?
Thraknor demanded.
It's...
Haxer's voice caught as he read the message scrolling across his datapad. His four-fingered hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the device, his crown bones making an annoying noise in a rapid pattern that any Zeraxi would recognize as extreme distress.
The scientific team reports some minor fluctuations in the teleportation containment field. Nothing serious, just some energy spikes in the...
The datapad chimed again, more urgently. Haxer's eyes darted across the new data, his pupils contracting to pinpoints as he processed the information. The teleportation beam was showing irregularities, spatial disturbances that shouldn't exist according to their understanding of physics. But surely it was just interference from the Earth's primitive tech. It had to be. Another chime, more insistent this time. Haxer silenced it with a gesture that was perhaps too quick, too nervous.
Scientist Haxer!
Thraknor's scales had shifted to a pattern of suspicion.
What aren't you telling us? Nothing of immediate concern, Commander.
Haxer forced his voice back to its professional tone, though his crown bones betrayed his anxiety.
The Earth samples are secure. The containment protocols are holding. We should focus on the matter at hand, the classification of Earth and its biosphere.
He gestured broadly to the assembled delegates, trying to redirect their attention.
We've established that Earth presents new challenges. The question now is how we proceed with this knowledge.
But the seed of unease had been planted. The floating islands began to shift and move with renewed agitation, their occupants no longer content to simply question Haxer. They turned to each other, and the chamber ignited an interspecies debate. The Underi sphere glided toward the Cryoth Island, and Ambassador Flowing Current's voice carried over the translation systems.
Surely you agree, Ambassador Trit, that these samples must be destroyed immediately. The risk of contamination...
Destroyed?
The Cryoth Ambassador's crystalline form refracted the chamber's light into prismatic patterns as they moved to their island's edge.
That's knowledge you are proposing to eliminate. We've spent resources beyond measure to obtain these samples.
The Zenti Island crackled with electrical discharge as its delegates engaged in rapid-fire communication with 3 other islands simultaneously. Their antennae created a web of blue-white arcs. Meanwhile, the Ferovan delegation's island slowly rotated, its occupants using their magnetic abilities to align themselves for optimal viewing angles as they observed the growing chaos.
The Underi delegation is not wrong,
shrieked Hicks from the Pure Ones, whose island maintained a perfect sterile environment. Their representative, encased in so many layers of protective barriers they resembled a nested doll, gestured frantically.
It's a plague world, a festering wound. It must be classified as a Class Omega contagion zone. No contact, no communication, no further study. We seal the entire system behind a quarantine field and delete its coordinates from every star chart.
The Vaskrak Island moved with deliberate force, pushing between the Underi and Pure Ones with enough momentum to send both spheres spinning gently away. Thraknor's voice boomed through the chamber.
Both of you are cowards. You would bury your heads in the sand while a potential threat grows unchecked.
Flowing Current had to swim hard to maintain her position as her sphere rotated.
They haven't even learned how to use teleportation tech alone. They're trapped in their own system.
For now,
Thraknor countered. His fellow Vaskrak had arranged themselves in a defensive formation, scales displaying the deep reds and purples of battle readiness.
But you heard the scientist. Life that adapts to anything. Beings that thrive in conditions that would kill us all. What happens when they develop the technology to leave their world?
The gentle Gardener's Island, filled with a humid green atmosphere that supported their plant-like biology, drifted closer to the debate. Their representative's fronds rustled with agitation.
Perhaps they already have. Perhaps these samples are a test, a probe to see how we react.
Paranoid speculation,
scoffed another island.
We have no evidence of hostile intent.
No evidence?
The Pyrathi spoke again.
They sent us pieces of their world that could kill us all, if that's not hostile.
The chamber descended into chaos. Islands began moving erratically, their operators either joining the debate or simply trying to avoid collision. The Underi sphere careened off the Deserti environmental pod with a resonant thud that sent both delegations tumbling within their habitats. The Deserti, adapted to their arid world's sparse resources, had minimalist furnishings that offered little to grab on, and their delegates found themselves pressed against their viewing walls in an undignified tangle of limbs. The Korthax Island accidentally rammed the Underi delegation's habitat. The impact sent a wave sloshing across the inside of the sphere, nearly knocking Ambassador Flowing Current off her fins.
Watch it, you six-armed brute!
She gurgled through the translator.
Order! Order!
Haxer's voice was lost in the din. His platform, designed to be the stable center of the chamber, began to feel more like an island in a storm as the other habitats swirled around him in increasingly erratic patterns. The Vaskrak had split their attention between the debate and what appeared to be tactical planning. Half their delegation was creating holographic models of Earth based on the data presented, running what looked suspiciously like invasion simulations. The other half was engaged in a heated discussion with the Thorali about their armors when exposed to Earth's atmospheric conditions.
Telling you, a single Earth microbe could devastate our entire agricultural system.
The gardeners were practically screaming through their translators now, their usually peaceful demeanor completely shattered.
We've spent millennia cultivating the perfect biospheres, and you want to risk it all for curiosity?
Science requires risk.
The Zenti response came not from one voice, but from dozens, their electrical communication allowing them to speak in perfect unison when they chose.
We cannot make informed decisions based on fear alone.
The Underi sphere collided with the Ferovan island, and the magnetic field's interactions sent both habitats spinning wildly. Flowing current could be seen pressed against the inner surface of her sphere, trying desperately to address the Council while tumbling in 3 dimensions.
This is exactly my point!
She managed between rotations.
This chaos is infectious! Look at us!
Indeed, the normally staid and formal Galactic Council had devolved into something resembling a barroom brawl, albeit one where the combatants were separated by environmental barriers and nobody could actually harm anyone else. The Cryoth Island had developed a spin that sent frozen nitrogen snow swirling in patterns that would have been beautiful if the occupants weren't throwing up inside the island. The Compatibility Island, containing representatives from multiple species in a carefully maintained neutral environment, had become a microcosm of the larger debate. A Zenti, a Pyrathi, and a Vaskrak were engaged in a 3-way argument so intense it required 4 different translation protocols running simultaneously.
And your maternal lava layer was a nutrient-deficient swamp slug.
A Zenti buzzed angrily at a Pyrathi, causing a minor electrical explosion from its own antennae.
Enough!
The word thundered through the chamber with such force that several islands actually stopped their chaotic movements. Haxur stood on his platform, his crown bones fully extended in a display that among his people signified absolute authority. His white robes billowed as he gestured, and for a moment, the elderly scientist looked less like an academic and more like the ancient Zeraxi warrior scholars of legend.
You are the Galactic Council!
His voice carried disappointment that transcended species barriers.
The greatest minds of known space reduced to whatever this is!
He gestured at the still spinning Underi sphere, where several naked delegates were looking distinctly green despite their blue coloration. The islands slowly stabilized, their occupants looking somewhat ashamed. The Deserti delegates picked themselves up with as much dignity as they could muster. The blobs reformed into their proper shapes, though a few were still flickering irritably.
I have a proposal,
Herzak continued, his voice returning to its measured academic tone.
My team and I have been developing a classification system for worlds like Earth. We call it the Death World scale.
Death World? Thraknor's interest was immediately piqued. A warrior's name. I approve.
It's not about warfare,
Haxur clarified quickly.
It's about categorizing planets that are inherently hostile to off-world visitors. Earth would serve as our baseline. Deathworld Class 10. Any world we discover with similar traits will fall somewhere on that scale. We may reassess Earth's classification if necessary.
He manipulated his datapad, and a holographic chart appeared above the platform.
The classification would consider multiple factors: atmospheric toxicity, gravitational stress, temperature extremes, atmospheric pressure, radiation levels, microbial aggressiveness, and native fauna hostility. Worlds would be rated on each factor, with the total score determining their Death World classification.
And what would this achieve?
Flowing Current asked. Her sphere had finally stopped spinning, though several of her fellow Underi were still looking queasy. Ripples of distress ran along their blue skin in waves, a physiological response to the intense disorientation they'd experienced. 2 of the younger delegates had their gill sluts fluttering rapidly, trying to filter more oxygen from their water to combat the nausea.
Understanding,
Haxur replied simply.
If we encounter other worlds like Earth, or worse, we'll be prepared. We'll know what precautions to take, what equipment to develop, what protocols to follow.
The council members exchanged glances across the void between their islands. The Logic Collective's representative spoke first.
The proposal has merit. A standardized system would prevent the kind of discord we just witnessed. It would also serve as a warning,
the Vastcrack commander added.
Any species approaching a death world would know exactly what they're facing.
And Earth?
The Pure One's representative still sounded worried.
What do we do about Earth specifically?
We seal it for now, study it from a safe distance, and...
Haxur's words were cut off as his datapad erupted in a series of alarms that could no longer be ignored. The device practically vibrated off the lectern with the urgency of the incoming message. This time, Haxur couldn't hide his reaction. His crown bones went completely rigid, then began to tremble, a physiological impossibility for his species except in cases of extreme shock. His large blue eyes dilated until they were almost entirely black.
What?
Thraknor demanded.
What's happening?
The teleportation chamber,
Haxor whispered, his voice cracking.
There's been an incident. The containment field. It's not failing. It's stabilizing. The energy signature from the other side is active.
He trailed off, staring at his datapad in disbelief. Around him, the islands had gone deadly still. Even the constant vibration of the life support systems seemed to pause once more.
Scientist Haxur?
Flowing Current's voice was carefully controlled.
What exactly are you saying?
I'm saying,
Haxur looked up, his expression one of dawning horror,
that the teleportation wasn't just a delivery. It was a handshake, and someone is shaking back.
The islands erupted in panic. The Undari sphere began moving toward the exits, as did several others. The Vastcrack were already reaching for weapons that weren't there. Council chambers were neutral ground, no arms allowed. The Pure Ones were practically shrieking through their translators about contamination protocols. But before anyone could act, before the panic could fully take hold, Haxur noticed something else. The islands weren't just moving in panic, they were staring at something behind him. One by one, delegates were freezing in place, their various organs of sight focused on something over his shoulder. The Zenti's electrical communication ceased entirely. The Cryoth stopped moving, their crystalline forms refracting light in patterns of shock. Even Thraknor, warrior of 100 campaigns, seemed stunned into stillness on his floating island. Slowly, with the careful movements of someone who absolutely did not want to see what was behind him, but knew he had no choice, Haxur turned around. The door to the chamber, the one that led to the teleportation complex, was open. Standing in the doorway was a figure that could only be one thing. Bipedal, roughly the same height as a Vastcrack, but more slender, with those strange patches of fur on its head that the samples had indicated. The fur was dark, almost black, and arranged in a style that seemed deliberate rather than natural. It wore coverings, clothes, Haxur's mind supplied, made of some dark material that seemed both formal and practical. Its skin was that pale pink-brown that seemed so vulnerable, so exposed. No scales, no exoskeleton, no visible protection against the universe's dangers. It was a human, a living, breathing human standing in an environment that, while not as hostile as Earth, was still calibrated for entirely different biochemistries. And it was smiling. The human raised one hand, 5 fingers, Haxur noted with the part of his mind still capable of scientific observation, in what might have been a greeting. When it spoke, the words came not through a translator, but directly, in accented but understandable Galactic standard. "Hello there," the human said, still smiling that terrifyingly placid expression that showed its teeth. "Ambassador Jones, from Earth. Sorry to drop in unannounced. You sent for a delivery, and we figured it'd be neighborly to bring it over ourselves. Hope we're not interrupting anything important." The silence that fell was absolute. 15 islands full of the galaxy's most advanced species, Beings who had conquered space and mastered the fundamental forces of the universe all stared at the lone human who stood there, unprotected, breathing their air, standing under their gravity, and smiling as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ambassador Jones tilted his head slightly, his smile silencing the room.
So, this is a bad time?